Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us today. We're very thrilled to have Mr. Fouad Addou with us from MVRDV, which is a very famous architecture, urban planning, urban design, and landscape firm based in the Netherlands, but who grew through the last 30 years into a global firm and worked on extremely interesting projects. We're very happy to have you with us, Fouad. Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
So my name is Mohsin Sadiq. Unfortunately, it shows Nama Blunder, but Nama cannot join us today, but I will be leading this exciting interview today with Fouad. Fouad has an experience with the Americas project as part of the Americas studio, where he worked on several projects in San Francisco, in Canada, and in Ecuador right now. And he'll be talking to us today about high rises and the challenges that come with it to create communities in the cities, and how densification is important and totally relevant to this time in our era, and how to do it better. So please, Fouad, feel free to.
Right, thank you. I would not say how to do it better, but at least from our perspective, how to do it well. So I'm Fouad Addou. I'm an architect, a senior project leader for a while now in MVRDV, and as you mentioned, in the Americas department. So we grew and started to go more and more into the American market. So I'll share my screen. So I'll hit it off. You're not supposed to see my email, so I'll share my PowerPoint. So MVRDV, we're an office based in Rotterdam, but we have satellite offices all over the world, or at least a couple, in Paris, Berlin, Shanghai, and now also New York. Yeah, as you mentioned, it got bigger and bigger, and we're now around 270 employees and growing. We worked over most of the world. Of course, we started in Europe since we're based in Rotterdam. We started expanding mostly in that area, and now we have exposure on also the east and also the west, more and more in North America. We started mostly with urbanism and architecture and a lot of research. It's a research-based company, I would say. Often our architecture is informed by the research that has been done either in collaboration with universities, so one of them is TU Delft, or in-house. We have a lot of scripting people and those scripting knowledge that we try to use to inform our design. So I was asked to talk about kind of density, like how to smartly densify a city and how to deal with high rise. So I think that often starts with the fascinations that an office has and our founders had back in the days. I think a couple of those I'll sum up here. One of them is the idea of the vertical village, basically taking all the qualities of a village, which is the small scale, people know each other. There are many kind of informal ways where it's kind of logical to meet each other, and there are all these qualities that you often lose when you densify and when you design high rise in the city. So one of the kind of interest is how to do that in high rise. So I've been doing a lot of research and a lot of model making with students and a lot of testing how you could apply it to a building. Of course, a building cannot look like this, but maybe more like this, and probably this is even too complex. Another thing is how you can make the city more green. Like often when we densify, there's a lot of concrete, there's a lot of vertical facades that are fully glazed, but there is very little green. And often it's only in the horizontal plane on the ground floor. And this is a very, of course, very abstract image, but what we try to do in collaboration with TU Delft is to find kind of more practical ways to script and test how much a city can handle green on facades, inside buildings, on top of buildings, around buildings, and how can you practically do that? And often the belief that people have is that the trees and plants cannot grow on top of buildings. But I think it has to do a lot with the way, if you have enough soil package, if you choose the right plants at the right height in the building, that we did in several places. So also in Eindhoven, we have a master plan that basically is dictated by certain sun rules and creating good quality on ground level. And another thing we try to advocate a lot is the possibility of rooftops. Like often rooftops are for mechanical spaces and that's it. But how can we use those rooftops in a better way? Like how can we activate the city in a better way? So we have this yearly event. It turned into a yearly event in Rotterdam, where MVRDV tries to build these temporary structures that either cross between different roofs or stairs that go to roofs to basically advocate for using roofs better. So there will be exhibitions, all kinds of programs, events, parties on roofs to advocate this to the city. And we developed this rooftop catalog that shows all the possibilities of how to use roofs and try to inspire municipalities and possible developers. And of course, there is the question of a city that easily becomes too generic if you just build for the amount of housing we need and don't spend too much on regulating how buildings should look like. So we always advocate the idea of having diversity within a kind of overcoupling cohesiveness. So in this plan, for example, there was a long strip that was literally cut into a barcode of streets and building volumes that then were shaped by certain sun regulations. You see like the building that on the right side that is stepping down is because of the sun and creating the best views, and then setting the rule that every facade should be different. So it's a collection that relates to each other, but also is very different. And we think that's important in the city, that you have diversity. Here you can see basically the volumes, if you would take those rules very literally. And I think then, yeah, if we go into Highrise, it comes with certain challenges. Like I think we as architects have the same or similar challenges all over the world, but also some challenges are different based on your culture, on your municipality and your regulations that you deal with. I think we're often dealing with cities that have to grow really fast. There is a huge demand of housing, and how can we house all these people in the fastest way and the most cheap way often? But then can we do that in a smart way and keep quality in the city, like when the city needs to grow so fast? And we're working more and more in Toronto now, and that's I think a great example of how a city that has to grow so fast still needs to keep certain qualities. And how can we avoid that high-rise cities become too generic, like too anonymous, and often you lose human skill when you have to build something fast and house people fast. So how do you keep that human skill and quality in the tower? And another thing is how do you keep that feeling of community, like we mentioned before, the vertical village that we often talk about. How do you keep that quality of for example, in this case, a small courtyard block where people know each other, kids of the neighbors play with each other? Could something like that apply also to Highrise? Then often what we experience, at least, there is a lot of pressure in terms of budget, in terms of efficiency of buildings, which sometimes lead to kind of irrational floor plans that are not the best for the people that live there. We notice that often when you make a tower, and at least our experience for Quayside, the competition we did in Toronto, there's such a demand on pumping up the towers, making the volume as big as possible to make sure that your financial scheme works, that sometimes you end up with apartments with bedrooms without direct daylight. And in Netherlands, for example, that was never accepted. And I think slowly the municipality is accepting it, which I think, is not really a good thing. And how can we try to altogether try to not go there? And the other is the contact with nature. Of course, it's very difficult in a high-rise city to keep the contact with nature also higher up. Like how can we, is there a way to still do that? And often we start to also question ourselves more and more, and that same discussion came in Toronto in the Quayside competition. Like when you go up really high, there's a lot of wind and there are a lot of difficult conditions. It doesn't even still make sense to the balconies. On the left side, for example, this is on Quayside, one of the towers, the balconies became so small at this height. Does it still make sense to make balconies there? And how do you create qualitative balconies higher up? So over time, we, as MVRDV, did a lot of competitions, and we also started building more and more of high-rise buildings. And I think there are a couple of themes that we try to always integrate into the designs, and it's different per project. But one, for example, is how to create vertical communities. And I think one of our classics, the Mirador in Madrid, is not necessarily super high, but it has those qualities, I think, to create a vertical community. So basically, it's a building block that has a different typology than the buildings around. It's It's kind of an outskirt of Madrid with all courtyard buildings. Of course, it's quite an iconic location around this roundabout. But we tried to do something very different than what was already there. So basically starting with the idea of the quality we liked. So the courtyard block where people can all meet each other, and it's a nice typology of living. But how can you reinvent that if you have to go higher? And at the same time, leave more space around you for other developments. So we literally took the courtyard block and turned it on its side to create a very nice public space next to the building, but also inside the building higher up. So you can have gathering high up in the building. So this is that space in the building. So it's basically a window to its context. So it's framing the hills and the beautiful context around, but at the same time, it's a gathering space. And I think this, since it's a classic, we also learned our lessons because I think as a theory was great and it works really well, the building. But I think with a bit more budget and a bit more willingness maybe of the people around us to really animate this space, it would have been even more successful. So the starting point was, apart from rotating the building and creating a public space higher up, also to mix a lot of different housing typology blocks. So every color block that you see here in the screen is a different housing typology with a different type of circulation. And that all together is bounded through this linear circulation that brings everything together. But I think in that way, a vertical building becomes way more interesting because you have a diversity of apartments, diversity of people, therefore, and kind of streets in the sky that you would not have in a normal high-rise. Like, for example, this one, this is an outdoor street that is quite much wider than a corridor, where people can meet higher in the sky instead of on the ground floor, which I think is quite interesting. But this is how it looks in its context. So it's actually the only building that is this high. And we see it a bit as kind of a counterpoint against the surrounding uniformity of housing blocks and trying to make a statement that we can do things differently. Another thing is how to humanize the tower. We're talking about kind of often towers become quite generic and you lose the human scale inside because every floor is the same. We need certain typologies of apartments that work well in the market, and that's it. But how can we do that hopefully better? So this is an example in Amsterdam. We call it the Valley. It's the highest tower is 100 meters high. It's a collection of 3 towers together with one base building. It just finished building and people start living there. So basically it's a bit outside the center of Amsterdam. Amsterdam, of course, is a very historical city, very low rise, small streets. So this is the area, the district, the business area where all the high rise in Amsterdam basically exists. And it's the edge, the end of that development. So the idea was here to, first of all, we started with the program we needed and that we pushed to the edges of towers. And the edges would represent basically the relationship with context. It was quite a corporate environment with a lot of glass facades. So we said, okay, the outside is relating to its context, but then everything what happens behind that exterior facade wants to tell the story about kind of creating human scale and starting from the individual unit to start expressing the individual unit, which normally you never read in a tower. And that altogether as a composition became the kind of a natural valley, as you can see it here. So of course it looks quite expensive and it most probably was, but I think it all depends on the environment, the moment in time you build something, having the right party next to you that has the same ambition and kind of daring to take that leap. And I think so here you see that contrast between the exterior facade, which is the contextual one, and the interior where you start reading those individual units. And the interesting thing here, I think, is that by breaking up the volume and creating all these different units that come out and go in, you also protect the balconies from wind. So you get a way nicer climate on your balcony than you would have in a normal balcony principle. So we use a lot of, and we try to do it a lot in the company to use scripting to optimize your design. So we used scripts to optimize views from your living rooms, to create privacy between balconies. Of course, when you pop out your volume, that becomes a challenge. To make sure you have enough daylight in every block, because when a block sticks out, the apartment below has less sunlight. So what is the optimal condition? And making sure that every single balcony has its own planter and its own green space, and protect from wind and sound. So this is how it works programmatically. So the ground floor, like most developments, were fully retail and culture and F&B. Above that, we stacked offices and then the housing in the top. And I think the interesting thing here is that there is a route going all the way that connects publicly over the terrace and goes down again. So like, I think sometimes it's important to push a little bit, because of course this could have been closed off, could have become a private terrace, but sometimes it's important to push a bit to take that one next step and to make sure that that everyone can use it. And now, for example, people who work there take their lunch breaks there, but actually people from 5 buildings further also come here to take a lunch break and overlook the beautiful sports fields next to it. So giving back somehow. So this is how that looks like. This is the office floor with basically kind of a valley trail that goes up over the terrace and down again, which is open during the day for everyone to enjoy. And then the offices around it. So we try to use this vegetation strategy that starts very intense in the bottom and becomes less intensive towards the top, and choosing the right species that could survive higher up in the building, and the right species for kind of a lush vegetation lower down. So this is, if you go a little bit higher, those are the apartments. And of course, at first sight, it looks, oh, this is pretty complex. All the apartments are different, which is often the response when we work together with the developer, which of course makes sense. But at the same time, if you look at the plans in a way that's more pragmatic, basically the center of all the plans are the same, and every floor of the apartment is actually the same. But the outline basically dictates the having a slightly different living room or slightly different bedroom. And in that way, we believe every apartment becomes different, but has the same services, has the same shafts. So it's quite easy to build in that sense. But everyone has a choice to have a completely different apartment. So this is how it looks right now. It's pretty new, so the plants are still growing. But you can see they're already quite, like all the terraces have their individual planter. And people start to slowly live there. And you see a lot of moments where this sort of niches that are fully protected from the wind, which we think is quite a nice climate. And then these gallery spaces that are public lower down. Which you can see here. This is where you would walk over the terrace, surrounded by these towers. You see this; it's pretty green, and every balcony is different, basically. So this is a building we just finished in, or almost finished in San Francisco. It's almost done building. It's kind of, it has some similarities to the previous project. It's around 80 meters, but it has one tower. So the location is kind of low resolution, but it's opposite to the Giant Stadium. It's a development with other architects. One of them is Henning Larsen, Studio Gang, and Work AC, where together we developed this small master plan. It's facing the water. And of course, one of the most important things was the relationship with the water. So what we try to do here is we stack the program, retail, office, and residential. But one of the problems, which we then try to turn into an opportunity, is that there was a huge residential floor plate that we couldn't really use and it was too dark. So it's okay, how can we turn it into something that actually makes the master plan better? So we basically cut up the volume and created an L-shaped apartment block and a smaller apartment block with a public route going through that would connect to other public carvings that go through the building or over the building or around the building in the other buildings in the master plan. So we become part of a network through the rest of the development. And then that carving, we turn it into, again, like a fragmentation of the facade where you have the individual balconies, which then became, we call it a mission rock. So sort of a valley going through with fully green terraces on top of the base building. And I think one of the qualities is that, and I think it's also, this shows when the budget is sort of tight, but there's a bit of space, where do you spend that budget? And what we try to do here is to create it in the space that faces the water, so where the most interesting views are, and basically try to create all these apartments with all corner conditions, because normally there are only 4 corners in the tower, but by pixelating and fragmenting the facade, many apartments start to have a corner with 2 beautiful views towards your context. And then we say, okay, then the rest, since there will be a lot of wind, like in most towers, there will be no balconies. With then the publicly accessible or communally accessible roofs and the public route going through this canyon in the center. So this is how that looks like. It's pretty far already in terms of building, but this would be that route. So of course there was a lot of discussions. It's always the question of Like, do you have to close off that canyon later a day? Is it safe to have everyone going up? And we of course understand all of that. But I think with a bit of collaboration, we managed to convince that it was worth it to have this public route. And we're really happy that we managed that in the end. So this is how far it is now currently building. We have Henning Larsen next to us, and this would be that public route going through, which you can see here. So you see really well that this fragmentation of the tower creates this kind of niches that are the balconies. So you always cover, you have a ceiling above you and a floor below you. So you're protected from the wind. You can see better here. And another thing is the vegetation. We already talked about it a bit, but we tried to bring that to the extreme in Ecuador. So this is development. Now it seems, of course, very out of context because there are no other buildings around yet, that there will be a waterfront full of high rises, where we developed 6 towers that currently started up the site. The highest tower is 143 meters. So basically, the inspiration for this project was having a lot of kind of a human scale, very small informal developments on a hill next to us, which was super green, and that hill was really important for the city. We thought, how can we take that as an inspiration and basically don't design only a skyline, but also design a natural topography. So become part of nature instead of only making a city a gesture. So it had a similar concept. So the outside was very similar to the buildings that are further up in the waterfront. So it's like a lot of Miami-ish wide facades, and everyone loves that there. But we thought, okay, we can do like everyone else, or we can try to make it slightly more interesting and try to introduce color, try to introduce materials that relate to nature, try to integrate vegetation, which didn't have anywhere else in the city. It was all just like empty balconies. So that's why we tried to create this interior world that was fully vegetated and uses material that refer to nature. So basically the starting point was we needed to make at the beginning 6 towers. Now there became 5 residential, commercial spaces in the bottom, and a lot of amenities, which we really appreciate. This developer pushed a lot for amenities as a collective need. We tried to push down the towers and create a bit more human scale towards the waterfront and go higher towards the more urban side on the back. And I think often in towers, especially when you design a collection, it's very important that everyone has good views. Like everyone has a qualitative apartment that has nice views to, in this case, the river. So the buildings were completely shaped by optimizing views for all the towers. So even within a very dense environment, I think you can try to optimize the quality of every apartment. Then we connected all the volumes together towards the basis step volume, which would help you to break the wind. And at the same time gives you the opportunity to have a lot of communal spaces and a lot of vegetation between the buildings. And then we rounded it off to, first of all, for safety reasons on the ground floor, because there's a lot of unsafety problems there, security problems there. And also by rounding it off, you basically make sure that there are never really corners, and corners are usually the most problematic when there's high winds. And then we integrated this kind of natural gradient of materials in the building and vegetation. So in this one, we tried to really push and work a lot with environmental factors. So one was views, one was the sun. So making ideal balconies that are shading the balcony below, making sure that based on orientation, those make sense, and minimizing wind loads. So in that way, we scripted the facades to be as optimal as possible. So you would shade your balcony below and still make sure everyone has good views in daylight. So this is basically how it started to look like, this natural facade, but in every single balcony, there would be vegetation all around. Our developer was okay with that, and we were proceeding with this, which of course the vegetation helps you a lot with cooling down also temperature. This is how that looks like. So that's a space in between. There's a lot of collective spaces. For example, in the center, you see a pool where which everyone could use. Of course, this is communal, not public. Lower down, there's a terrace where you can overlook the water. And then just below that, there it's fully public. So there's 2 levels of public retail with a tribune also facing the water. So we try to at least introduce a tribune for everyone, which would basically be here, where people could gather. Again, similar discussion, is it safe or not, but we managed in the end. So this is how that collection of communal spaces looks like. I think one of the other things is how do you create like really qualitative outdoor spaces, but also make sure there's differentiation in your apartments. So I think a good example is this one, and we call it, is the Sax, which is a tower that hopefully soon will get built next year in Rotterdam. So this is a small island in the river the Maas, where we call it Small Manhattan, where all the towers, or the biggest towers of Rotterdam are. So what we did here is basically 2 towers that are connected with the volume that back then was a hotel. And then there's this gradient of pixels that start as loggias in the bottom and become evaporate and become balconies higher up. So this is the location, facing the water, but being part of this big collection of towers. And in the future, they will build an island here with even more towers. So this is how it looks from closer up. And as you can see, we truly believe in protecting balconies from wind. So what you can see here, there are all these different types and different forms of balconies that are protected. And you can also see that in the floor plan. So every living room is kind of different because that pixel or that volume is in every floor in a different place. Which if you make those modules as a piece in itself, they can just place against the facade is not necessarily very complex. Of course, more insulation lines and more facade, but because of that, also you create way more interesting and more protected balconies higher up. And what we try to show here is that the way you connect these pixels create different shapes, sometimes double high, sometimes single high, sometimes an L shape balcony. So it's different for everyone that lives in the tower. And the same in the floor plan. So in its base, this rectangle of the living room is the same, but based on how you place the volumes, every living room becomes different. One, for example, we call it the jazz living room, where you could have a big piano standing in that corner. Or when you have the bachelor crib, what if you create a kind of a pool table there, or maybe you could even have a small greenhouse or a winter garden in the building. And I think another one is the last one actually. Is the one, yeah, sorry, that's the last. I will be quick. The one we think is really an impulse for the neighborhood. Like sometimes neighborhoods need something that is a beacon. And that was a starting point for this one. So this is in the north of Manhattan. It's a kind of underrated neighborhood, but a very kind of multicultural and colorful neighborhood, which was the starting point. So this is the location. So most of the ground floors look like this over there. So they were super colorful. People really appreciated the diversity of colors and kind of the vibrance that was there was very interesting. So we took that as a starting point together with this collection of very generic, simple blocks with simple punctures as windows, and we stacked them on top of each other to create sort of a vertical neighborhood. So you can see it's quite similar to the buildings in the front, but of course more colorful and stacked on top of each other. You can see it here. And some execution things could have been better. Like afterwards, we're not super happy about everything, but we really think it became a beacon that kind of celebrates this part of the city, which wasn't really celebrated before, and people were quite happy with it. So that's it, actually.
Thank you, Fouad. It was very insightful, and for the few of us maybe who know a little bit already about this project, it's very interesting to hear from someone from the inside. Unfortunately, we try to keep our webinars to 30 minutes, so they would fit in our attendees schedule and of course fit in our guest schedules. I will try to wrap up with one question that's probably I'm gonna have to choose only one, and I'm trying to mix it with well, the main question would be design excellence. I want to talk about this item. I know MVRDV has gotten multiple awards and distinctions, but what would be for you the key balance for this attractive design and innovative design with all those constraints, may them be financial, structural, etc., and how can they participate? And I'm adding this because it's one of our attendees' question. How do the variable floor plates, for example, in the Valley project, how could they help or could they address the affordable housing crisis, and how could they be part of solving the issue?
Yeah, very good question. I think Yeah, in terms of, I think it has to do a lot with the economical climate at the moment. So I think the valley was built in the right moment where, where there was a lot of contractors that needed to get jobs and therefore took a job that may have been slightly more expensive. But I think it's also choosing your battles. In some projects, there's a bit more willingness from developers, so there's more willingness to invest and to do something that's actually great. And some there's less. So I think it's choosing your battles. And I think, for example, an interesting example was Quayside. It's not officially published yet, but it's a high-rise development in Toronto, where we had a collection of towers. But we also needed to integrate mid-rise buildings with social housing. And there, the strategy was to basically pay the social housing from the money you would make with making the towers slightly higher, add a couple of more apartments, and keep the higher buildings slightly more generic, so you could pay those mid-rise buildings with social housing in it. So yeah, of course, that is also a lot up to municipalities and the regulation they set to developers, and it's not always in our hands. But sometimes you can bargain. That's why we tried there. Like we spend a bit less money here, and we spend a bit more there. Yeah, there are a lot of factors, and it's sometimes very difficult. But we try our best, I guess.
The power of compromise. Well, thank you very much. I just want to remind our attendees that the idea of reaching out to MVRDV came after watching the movie Under Tomorrow's Sky, which is a movie that was screened at the Toronto Design Film Festival, and I very much invite people to go look for it and watch it. It's very interesting. It's a movie that follows for 2 years the life of Winnie Mas, who is one of the founders of MVRDV. And I guess this is time. Thank you so much for coming. And
thank you for having me.
Thank you, and hoping to see more MVRDV work in Toronto soon.
Soon, very soon.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye.